From the magnificent Midwest, this is the Suzanne Venker Show, where men and women are equal in value, but wildly different by nature. Join us here every week when we challenge the culture's hugely flawed narratives regarding men, women, sex, and love. From coast to coast and from around the world, thank you for joining us. This program is brought to you in part by Let's Get Real, where forensic accountant Tiffany Couch uses her financial skills to shine the light on the real issues we all face every day. If you'd like to make decisions based on facts rather than on feel-good rhetoric and cultural pressures, go to letsgetreallife.com, a place where you can find tools to improve your communication skills and to increase your connection to humanity. That's letsgetreallife.com. Today on the show, we're going to talk with my assistant, Kelsey, who's a millennial, about her generation's attitude and beliefs about money, men, and marriage. So it should be really great. But before we do that, a couple of quick announcements. So I have a new shop page on my website that I wanted to alert you all to at SuzanneVenker.com, where you'll find several things actually, but specifically my brand new ebook, How to Be a Wife, 7 Secret Steps to a Peaceful and Passionate Relationship with Your Man. And most exciting is that the audio version is now completed and it will be available in the next few weeks. So if you're one of those people that just does not have time to read and would love to listen to the book instead, and it's short, by the way, it's a short ebook, purposefully short, that will be available very, very soon. So keep watching out for that. If you want to get the actual ebook, you can do that right now on SuzanneVenker.com on the shop page. So many of you also know that I do marriage coaching. You can also find that on my website. I specifically work with women who were, for a variety of reasons, never taught how to bring out the best in a man in order to get the best from him and to have a peaceful and passionate relationship. And even despite, hopefully, once you've purchased How to Be a Wife, at the end of the book, I tell people, just learning these skills, just reading about it isn't going to be enough. More often than not, you're going to need some coaching to put these skills into action. So that's what I do. And so if you are somebody who feels frustrated in your marriage, just go to my website and click on coaching at the top, and you can sign up for your free 30-minute discovery call. Finally, I'm in great need of Patreon support and would so appreciate it if you become a subscriber. Just go to thesuzannevenkershow.com and scroll down until you see the Become a Patron button, where you'll find 4 very economical levels as well as free gifts for signing up. And if you have a business you want to promote, there's even an option for that. Okay, so I know I told you all that my husband would be back and that we would be doing the Bill and Suzanne hour, but for a variety of reasons, it's not going to be workable for us to do that right now. So we're going to have to put that on hold. I definitely want him to come on periodically. But yeah, so it's just as well, actually, because I wanted to talk with you all about a subject that I'm facing every day in my own coaching work. And of course, most of you who know, I write about this very, very often. And that is what's happening with millennials when it comes not just to marriage and dating, actually, but when it comes to money, because and I don't talk a lot. I mean, I don't think I've ever really talked, certainly not on the podcast, about money. We're going to be doing more of that because I don't think it's an avoidable topic, especially when you're talking about millennials, because there's so much, all those things are interrelated. And so rather than just pontificate on the subject for an hour, I asked my assistant, Kelsey, to join me because, once again, as some of you may know if you've heard her before, she is a millennial and she knows personally firsthand what I'm basically going to be talking about today. And so I thought it would be great to have her here to bounce things off of. And she also has her own story to tell, which is very fascinating. And you don't want to miss this. So let's get right into it. Say hello, Kelsey.
Hi, how's everyone doing out there?
We have to announce also something very important, and that is that Kelsey is a new bride. She and her husband, I love saying that now, finally, Kelsey. Oh my God. Finally, I can say it after so many years.
I know.
She and her husband just tied the knot last week in Nashville. My husband and I went and joined them, and it wasn't a wedding. So we're going to be talking about this later for sure, because it was really an elopement, not a wedding. And that has everything to do with COVID. So we're going to get into that as well. I know she's got a lot that she wants to say to people about that. But just before we dig in, just sort of an overview of why this subject is so important to me and what it is specifically that I'm talking about. So millennials, if you don't know, are essentially right now between the ages roughly between 25 and 40. Anyone younger than 25 is where my kids are. I have a 17 and 20-year-old, and that's Generation Z. So typically, and then Generation, let's see, what am I? What am I, Kelsey? I'm X, right? Generation X.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm X. I'm 52. And Kelsey's 31. So she's a full-on millennial. That's why she's here. Okay. Full on. So, millennials get a lot of coverage in the media. I'm sure most of you know that. When we're talking about the modern generation, right, or the younger generation, not the ones that are still coming up now, like my kids, and not so much us, because we're like over the hill, but all in between there, we're really talking about millennials. And holy crap, there is so much to say about this generation. I don't want it to be a big rag on them. I mean, there's definitely good things to say. It's just that there's a lot of bad things to say. So we have to talk about it. And specifically, what my concern is, and my sort of shock has been, is their entire approach to life. And I want to say first that this is a very important piece of this. I truly do not blame or think that millennials are actually at fault for this. To be perfectly honest, I blame their parents. So I've written about it a lot, and I talk a lot about baby boomers. And any sister-in-law of mine who's listening right now needs to exempt himself or herself, any baby boomer sisters-in-law or brothers-in-law, because I have a handful of them, and they're all wonderful, and their kids are all wonderful, and they're of course exempt from this conversation. But baby boomers in general, I definitely don't have a lot of good things to say about, because I think they created this, and so okay, so what am I talking about specifically? So Kelsey, correct me if I'm wrong, but your generation was essentially taught to map out a life that made college and education and career the number one goal, the most important thing in life, to the degree where it's not just getting an education, but valuing it above all else, as though without that, you're pretty much, why would you not have that education? That's like the most important thing in the world. And if you have to go into debt to do it, well, that's what you do. Okay. That's the value that was taught. And then mixed in with that, of course, is, well, if you're going to make that your focus, then marriage and motherhood is like way down the line. It's something that it's either an afterthought or sort of a side dish, if you will, to your main life purpose. And as a result of that, you're going to invariably move in and out of all these heavy duty relationships. Well, not always heavy duty. Sometimes it's just casual, or heavy duty relationships, even shacking up with men for whom you're not going to end up married to. And it just sort of, the whole plan is just, it's got so many legs to it, because there's so much to talk about that doesn't work within that plan. Is that an accurate representation of what you got from either the culture or your own upbringing?
That is definitely the message that I received, not so much from my upbringing, because like I've said before, I think I was in another podcast of yours several months ago, but not so much my upbringing, but definitely culturally, marriage, family, motherhood were definitely an afterthought, and not so much for me education wise, but career. I put a huge emphasis on my career, and I believe that career was the most important thing. I never even thought about marriage or motherhood within that scope.
Isn't that it? See, never even thought about it. So fascinating.
Never.
And of course, so just tell your story. So what ended up happening for you with respect to that list of priorities and how things worked out for you?
Well, I turned 29 and I believe now I'm starting to see if with a lot of, girls and women my age, something changes in you between the ages of, I would say, for me, it was more like 27 to 30. You feel like there's a part of your life that is missing. And for me, it was very much, I wanted to get married, and I had never thought about having children, but just in my own soul, I felt like, what is all this for? I studied, I worked really hard, I was pursuing a career, and it started to seem very unimportant to me, which was interesting.
Because you didn't expect it, you mean? And what's important to note about that is that you are not an anomaly by any stretch of the imagination. So what I want people to hear mostly from this is that almost all of my coaching clients are millennials, which makes sense, and they all have the same story. They really do. And what's fascinating about it to me is that it angers me that nobody, specifically, i.e. the parents, did not school them on how to create or map out a life that was going to work for them, and not to just be quiet and support the cultural insistence that, oh yeah, it's totally fine to go into debt to get your degree. Anything you have to do to get your degree. I mean, it's one thing to go into a little bit of debt at your local, state school or whatever. And it's another to aim so high as though some big degree, so a degree from a big school is going to ultimately determine your success or your happiness in life, which is absolute crap. And so that's what I mean by the value shift. By just tweaking that whole concept of education and career first, marriage and motherhood later, it just set off a whole series of problems as a result of that. Because if you're going to say to someone, okay, don't worry about that, just get married in your 30s. Well, okay, so what are your 20s going to look like? And when you're done doing that, what's it look like, right? Because that's where you get the people who, I mean, so many of my coaching clients, so many of my wives, the women that I coach who are now wives, I mean, across the board, ended up getting married around 30 or 31 to the guy they happened to be dating at the time, who seemed, quote unquote, nice enough kind of thing, because they wanted children. And they talk about sometimes men from their past that they could have married and didn't marry because it wasn't the right time. And that's a big cross to bear, because that has to do with the idea of so many people telling young people that if you meet the one at 23 or 24, well, you can't possibly get married then, right? And so they ultimately pass over this person and think that they're going to find another one down the road when they're ready, right? So like the whole plan is just supposed to revolve around you and your needs and your choices, and that you'll just fit this other stuff in around it down the road. And the money piece has really, I want to talk about money, because you can't really talk about all this without talking about money, because most of the people who end up mapping out their lives this way do end up going into debt. We know this because this is why marriage is on the downward, because they say, if you ask them, the research shows that they are not getting married, according to them, because they can't afford to, quote unquote, because they cannot afford to. Now, that's different from saying you can't afford to back, 50 years ago when, well, you wouldn't have said it 50 years ago. What I mean to say is that people were poor when they got married. They didn't have anything, and they built it together. But that was a completely different mindset than young people have today. So the idea is that you're supposed to get yourself situated and have this life and then get married, but none of it's working out. Financially, it's not working out. They can't find a man because by the time they're looking, the men who are 32, 33 can marry someone younger. And that's what I mean about this domino effect that it has.
Well, a point that I'd like to make is now, in light of COVID, I think we're seeing that not that getting a university degree is obsolete, because of course you need to be educated. Women and men need to be educated, but you're seeing with the layoffs, the loss of jobs, the remote working that people are doing, that the whole thing has changed. as far as education goes. You know, the people that are working right now that I see are people with trades that are necessary.
It's so funny you said that, because I literally just today heard an entire podcast on with this guy, Ken Rusk, Rusk, who has a new book out called Blue Collar Cash. It's a great title. And it's all about, essentially, he's not anti-college at all. If you have a specific degree for a specific thing, absolutely, of course. But if not, if you're just going to go to get this general or generic degree
in
or
women's
a degree,
studies,
God forbid, yes, oh God, well, yes, especially anything that you can't use and is complete
or
waste of money.
Political science.
Yeah. Poli-sci, and poli-sci. Then you're basically racking up all this debt to get a useless degree that you can't do anything with. This is extremely common among millennials, very much so. I don't know that anybody really tells them anymore, because back in my day, you were told, like, if you're going to get a degree, what are you going to do with it? Make sure it's something practical, or at least I was.
Well, that's why I ended up not finishing my degree. I'm a musician by trade. I was going to a very prestigious music school in Boston, Berklee College of Music, very expensive private school. And I thought to myself, my parents were going to go in probably, by the time I graduated, with living expenses and all of that, room and board, it was going to be, probably $200,000. And I thought to myself, why? I don't need a degree in music. A degree in music is a complete waste unless you're going to teach at a university. You want to get a master's in music to teach, but otherwise that was a completely pointless. That's just a way for the colleges and universities to make money, is to offer senseless degrees.
No question.
That needs.
Oh, it's just terrible. And I mean, and the residual of this debt, I'm telling you, almost every single one of my coaching clients have serious, serious debt. And that debt is dramatically affecting their marriage.
100%.
Duh. I mean,
100.
Duh. So, I mean, nobody told them that in advance. Hey, if you can't afford it, don't go. Find something you can afford. Or make it a reasonable goal, so that, and explain how that you will start your marriage off on a bad foot if you're going into it in debt. And, you and I are both Dave Ramsey followers.
Big time.
And and for those of you who are listening, I have his daughter coming on in a few weeks, Rachel Cruz, who has a new book out called Know Yourself, Know Your Money. And I'm really excited for that conversation, because it's so, so critical to understanding who you are, how you think when it comes to money, and then how it plays out in your relationships, which is what I want to focus on when she comes on. So yeah, that's what I mean by this domino effect of it's so important to map out your life in such a way as to understand that every decision you make affects another one. And that by the time you've made a series of those decisions, there you go, there's your life, and you're stuck with it.
Exactly.
And not in a pessimistic way where, well, okay, you're screwed, you could never get out of it. I don't believe that. You always can, but you're making it harder, for one thing. And you have to have an awareness of how these things affect one another. And I just don't think that anybody's connecting those dots. So that's what's most concerning about your generation. So now I'm sort of left trying to help them pick up the pieces of all these decisions they've made, that are really about, I mean, that's not really the focus of the coaching. The coaching is about helping women bring out the best in men, and you follow these steps, and it works beautifully, and that's all fine. But in the meantime, there are bigger issues too that go along with that are kind of, that can impede that whole process or make it harder, because they're bringing all this not just debt to the table, but also just a lot of baggage. There's the word. A lot of emotional baggage, not only from their own upbringings, because they're products of divorce largely, or whatever the case may be. And then they have this history of other men that they've been with for many, many years. And this is why I'm a big advocate of earlier marriage, which I haven't done a podcast on yet. I will. And by earlier, I don't mean before 25, because statistically, you have a much higher chance of divorce if you marry before 25. So I'm not a fan of it before 25. So when I say earlier, I just mean somewhere between 25 and 30, as opposed to this, just as opposed to later. Let's just put it that way. And it's because of all the things that we're talking about right now as to why I'm an advocate for that. And nobody talks about that because that's so, it's not even that it's taboo. It's that your generation just doesn't even, it's like if I said that, it's like I'm saying something foreign that they wouldn't even, unless you're from a religious family, I guess, because they will marry earlier. But for this, just for your average modern woman who's a millennial, they tend to buck against the idea of mapping out your life counterculturally, and then don't become really open to it until they've gotten themselves in a pickle.
And
right?
and I don't think that my generation specifically takes into account what coming into a relationship, like a marriage relationship, one where you're intending to get married. I don't think that they take into account what bringing that kind of financial strain into a relationship does. From my own experience, my husband, I'm excited to say husband, actually. Oh, there we go.
Awesome.
He came into our relationship debt free. And I was the one that was insisting on, I guess, living above our means. Saying, well, just finance it. And I don't think that my generation understands the implications of really coming into a marriage with each of you've lived together, but you've got your separate debt and everybody's building this debt up. And then what that means for your relationship, I just don't think it's impressed enough upon my generation how that debt and bringing that into the marriage can affect the marriage.
And not only that, of course, again, one of the biggest things that I deal with is having to help these couples understand that there is no such thing as my debt and your debt once you get married. You marry the debt. I mean, that's what you're choosing.
True.
You're choosing to say, I love you. We're going to tackle this together, because by law, once you're married, it is our debt.
Correct.
And and I cannot tell you how many couples that I work with where it's, when they first get with me, it's my bank account, his bank account, my money, your money. I pay for this, he pays for this. It's like your roommates. It's no different. There's just no concept of what it means to be married. And so it's almost like I have to start from explaining what marriage is. I mean, that's how far removed I feel like millennials are from understanding what marriage is, what it's supposed to be, what it is, how it's supposed to work. I don't know. It's just, I mean, and that actually starts, well, anyway, okay, that's for another day. So I'm glad you brought that up about the money, because that is such a bit, I mean, about having separate accounts, because that's as long as you're starting the relationship with that idea that you are separate financially, even though you got married, you're going to find that your marital problems are completely connected to that belief system and that behavior. And you don't know that until you're knee deep in it and you're like, why are things not working? Well, that's partially it right there. You haven't even begun to merge as one and to think as one. And of course, we get into a big conversation about that. There's decline in religion, and that had a huge factor. That has a huge factor in the way young people view marriage, because they don't have that piece to it, which is really how it all used to be. But at any rate, okay, so another big element or aspect of your generation is what I call, and I certainly didn't come up with it, I'm just saying, just insanely inflated, ridiculous expectations. Like
I'm laughing because it's true.
I mean, off the charts. And let's face it, it's the women. It's not the men. Men are so simple. Their needs are so simple, and they haven't changed since the beginning of time.
No, they're pretty easy to please, actually. I'm discovering that, actually.
Yeah, very.
Yeah.
This is a woman issue. I mean, the expectations are absolutely off the charts. And actually, if you ask any counselor, because I have many, who've been counseling for decades, like they're older, and I ask them, what is the one thing that you've noticed that the problems, what are the problems that you've noticed in the last, say, 15, 20 years compared to 25, 30, 35 years ago? That's one of the biggest ones. Oh my God, the expectations are off the charts, and so there's just no way to this is why, I mean, it gets so bad when you read a lot about this, and you really, as I do, and you're really immersed in it, you get to the point where you want to be really extreme about it and say, just don't have any expectations. You just don't have any. You can't go wrong if you don't have any. Forget low low expectations. Just don't have any.
Well, what I wanted to say about that is that I, of course, because I work with you, I listened to your previous podcast with Bradford Wilcox on the soulmate myth. And, something that really resonated with me was the Eat, Pray, Love discussion with Elizabeth Gilbert, because that was one of my favorite books growing up. I loved that book. And the truth about relationships that I'm learning as a millennial, getting married, being with the same person for over 5 years, which for a millennial is pretty significant.
Is that pretty common too?
Yeah.
It's like as Dave Ramsey would say, pain or get off the ladder. Get married already.
And, life is really hard. So I think people look to these pop culture, whether it's the movies or the books, for some sort of inspiration and also for a relief. And you start to buy into that myth that, you're going to have great sex 365 days a year. You're going to be in love with the person that you're married to. You're going to travel and do all of these great things that just don't exist in
the real world.
So I think what it does is it puts this uncomfortable feeling in you that if you don't have that there's something wrong with you or your relationship. And I think that's really detrimental to young people and to couples.
And I think we underestimate how much that is in the average millennial woman's head. I really believe that.
Hugely, because you're taught as, growing up in school, especially in schools. And I want to stress that point, like schools and the culture, pop culture, you deserve the best. And anything less than the knight in shining armor with the Bentley and the, you're treated like a queen. If that's not how life is, and it's not good enough for you. And I think that's really, really bad and super unrealistic. And ridiculously unfair to men, because how could the average man possibly measure up? Obviously, anybody you marry is going to seem subpar compared to that. And you're going to see the worst of them at their worst. You're going to see their bad habits. You're going to see their weaknesses. And part of, to me, having a good relationship is learning to accept the faults in others. Because, for a long time, I would look at myself like, well, I'm perfect, because that's the way the culture was teaching me, is as a woman, you can do no wrong. And the truth is that when I look at myself, sometimes I have to kind of step back and say, well, you know what? Maybe you're a bitch sometimes.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like maybe it's you.
Yep.
Maybe it's you that's causing the problems. Maybe your expectations are too high. So that's what I would tell women, young women, especially around my age, trying to find a husband or want to settle down. Like it's not about you. Like the whole thing is not about you and your expectations and, all that.
When you got married, things were perfect. You were both in love and life was good. Then somewhere along the line, everything changed. She changed, or maybe he did. Either which way, now your relationship feels, well, hard. I coach husbands and wives who feel lonely, disrespected, or misunderstood in their relationship. So many women today are desperate for their husbands to step up to the plate, to make a decision and to stick to it, to lead rather than to follow. Ladies, you have the power to make it happen. Men respond best to women who are grounded in their feminine core. As for husbands, so many of them want their wives to stop nagging and to just trust them, to smile more and to complain less, to look at them the way they did when they were first dating. Men, you have the power to make it happen. Women respond best to men who are grounded in their masculine core. The secret to lasting love rests in the masculine-feminine dance. Once you master it, your relationship will no longer be difficult. You'll be moving with the biological tide rather than against it, and that makes marriage smooth sailing. If you're struggling in your relationship, if you feel frustrated or alone, I can help. Just go to SuzanneVenker.com, that's SuzanneVenker.com, and click on the coaching button at the top. Don't wait another minute to acquire the mindset you need to find love and to sustain it. It's so much easier than you think. That's SuzanneVenker.com. Okay, and before we get to this other aspect, I'm going to read a couple of letters from young women. I guess you could say, well, okay, I guess it could be related to inflated expectations. Well, yes, it definitely is related to inflated expectations, and that's the concept that you can literally do everything you want to do, and have everything you want all at one time, and there's just no fallout from that. Now, that's not an entirely new concept. That was big even for my generation, but not anything like the way it is for yours. In fact, 20 years ago, when I wrote my first book, the mommy wars were raging. They don't really exist anymore, but man, were they big. I mean, if you just had any opinion whatsoever about how kids should be raised, that wasn't the, that went against the status quo, which is mothers can have it all and go back to work full time and year round with babies and toddlers, and there'll be no problem with that. If you said anything negative about that, which I did, then you're blackballed or whatever. Now, it's changed a little bit. Not that you're no less. I think people are quieter about that. So they've been sort of silenced, but I've noticed that with your generation, instead of it being a debate, which it was 20 years ago, that people were like hashing out in the media and everything, it's now, how do I describe it? It's like you don't even consider that there's any other way to live at all, and that so much of that has to do with the debt they got themselves into. Again, this is the fallout of what I was saying, the whole domino effect of prioritizing the wrong things in your life with your life plan, so that of course you're going to work full-time year round, because how the hell else are you going to pay off those student loans, I mean.
Yeah, for a degree that really doesn't make you money in the marketplace. I mean, a lot of people are getting degrees that the cost of the degree doesn't equate to the yearly earnings at all.
Not if you've spent several $100,000.
Yeah, they're very silly.
Now there's a couple. So I have a couple of letters here from different women. One of whom the financials would have worked out because she's a doctor. So I'm going to get to that in a second. The other one I don't know, because she's talking about getting a PhD, but I don't know what it was in. But anyway, she writes, this is from Greta. She writes, "Dear Suzanne, I wanted to thank you for what you were doing. Unfortunately, I was brainwashed by feminism and have probably made every single mistake you write about. I had a baby last year in September, and my expectations from reality differed like night and day. I had huge plans to return to university to finish my PhD in psychology. PhD in psychology. I mean, I would think you could get a psychology degree and do just fine just with that, Yeah,
I mean,
certification or whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway, okay. Had plans to submit a paper for publication and didn't give much thought to daycare, as it seemed natural and a no-brainer because everyone was doing it. However, I still haven't returned to university. And during this past year, I couldn't understand why I'm finding, listen to this, I couldn't understand why I'm finding looking after a baby and working on my PhD so difficult. I couldn't understand why I can't balance, and this is where it gets sad, the two, I couldn't understand why I can't balance the two. And for that, I felt stupid, lazy, incompetent, like I wasn't trying hard enough. I thought, how come everyone else is doing this? And yet here I am unable to do it. After having read your books, I had an aha moment. Oh, so that's why, because you can't, and most women aren't doing it. I even took my daughter to daycare. I only lasted 2 days because I felt knives in my chest and throat. And when I returned to pick her up, she looked shell-shocked and didn't even recognize me for like 5 seconds. I will never forget that, and I don't even know what I was thinking. Just the other day, I thought, wow, I never even trusted strangers to look after my dog. So it took me a while to realize a very common sense thing, that my daughter is now the center of my universe and everything else will revolve around her, not the other way around. Yeah. And I mean, that's the message I've given all along, is like, this does not have to be an either or thing. This has to be priorities, priorities, priorities. What is going to matter most? And you may not understand at 23 what the hell is going to matter most to you at 33, but I can bet my life savings that it's going to be family. And so I want you to be able to map out a life that allows you to do that and not be stuck because you're up to debt. I mean, you have debt up to your eyeballs, and because the world tells you you're supposed to live this other way. It's terribly, terribly sad.
One thing that I think is really sad is that there aren't enough role models. The role models that you see in Hollywood, that are having kids well into their 40s or late 30s, they have staff.
Yep.
And
money
still,
and a bottomless pit of cash
and a ton of money. And the bottom line is even they're still human beings. Those women that have the nannies and have the system in place, they still feel guilty. And most women, the majority of women, don't have access to that kind of life. So to tell people that that's the way that it is, you're lying to them. And I believe, again, it's political to some extent, the reasoning, and there's a sinister narrative of why that's all going down that way. But I just don't see enough role models that, that a woman that has children that puts the kids first, or a homemaker, those people don't exist in the media.
And because most of the women that are doing that you're not going to hear from them. They're just regular people doing their thing. Exactly. Right? They don't have the spotlight. They don't have a platform. They don't have a microphone.
Correct.
So no question about that. Absolutely no question. Which is why, by the way, I keep coming down to the only solution I know of, because that's not what you just said isn't going to change. You're always going to see the very liberal, very feminist, very working mother, rah, my life is myself, who cares about my family, getting divorced, that's fine, the kids will be fine, blah, blah, blah. All that stuff. You're never going to hear anything but that from the media, right? Whether it's Hollywood or the news media or magazines or whatever. Like, it's always going to be that. So what is the only recourse?
The Suzanne Venker show.
No. Thank you very much. But that's not.
And hold on, let me just say though, like, why we have all these listeners listening to us, like, that's why you need to become a patron. That's why you need to spread the links. That's why you need to become a supporter, because this is the alternative media is the future. People like Suzanne, those are the people that are going to change the world, because people are getting tired of hearing BS.
You know what's funny? I just read today about Megyn Kelly.
I heard about it.
I know. I don't like Megyn. I'm not a big fan of Megyn Kelly, as you know. But she did make a point in here, basically what you just said, that the traditional media is dying.
It's dead. Traditional media is dead. They're liars. Nobody believes them. So the future is the podcast.
I agree with that.
People like you. So that's
okay. So thank you. That's not what I meant, but that's a wonderful plug.
Sorry.
I love you for that. So, but no, what I was going to say is the only recourse to the crap that you hear in the culture is parenting. How you parent your children, I don't care what people say, it is a huge deal. You will get people who will say, well, but Suzanne, at the end of the day, we can't overrule the culture or whatever. So there's no question that what's happening around you, especially when they get older, their friends and their friends' parents and, and the culture will affect them dramatically. And in fact, to the point where there'll be a few years there where you'll probably feel like you're just, chopped liver. Right. But that does not mean that you don't counteract those messages as early as possible throughout the years that you have them at home. And this is what I want to bring my husband on periodically. Like I said early in the show, and I don't think I'm going to be able to do the monthly like I had planned, but I do want to bring him on periodically to talk about countercultural parenting and how to parent your children in a way that at least you have some measure of control to ward off those lies while they're in the home, right? Once they're gone, they're gone. and we're getting to that stage of life. One's gone, one's almost gone. But I feel like their thought process is done now. Like whatever influence we wanted to have, it's kind of done. But we were specifically countercultural from day one. And it is not easy. It is not easy. You're going to go against the grain. You're going to get people looking at you. And this holds true for anything from, things that are not political, the way we raise them, to things that are more political. Although political isn't exactly the right word. It's just raising them with common sense, old-fashioned, traditional, classic values.
And conservative values to some extent.
They are conservative, and I'm not against that word, obviously. It's just that, to me, it's gotten so crazy today that I can't even call it that anymore. To me, it's just common sense. Realistic, sound advice and values about what is going to work best for you down the road. Now, I don't mean that you tell your children how to live. That's not at all what I mean. I mean, you have to counteract what they're hearing so that they have heard the other side as they go along, so that they can then make the decisions for themselves. So, for example, when I say you pass it on, okay, so let's say you have a daughter and she thinks actually, this goes really good with what I'm going to read to you next from this other gal. She wants to be a doctor. Now, this is a really controversial thing. So if your daughter wants to be a surgeon, let's say, God forbid you tell her, well, I mean, I wouldn't have any problem with it, but God forbid you tell the world that you would tell her, okay, so that's fine, but what are your other plans for your life outside of that? Mm-hmm. And if she were to say, well, I want to get married and have 4 kids, you absolutely are responsible for telling her how that's going to play out from a realistic standpoint, as opposed to just kowtowing to the politically correct crap. Oh yeah, that's great. You just go for it. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, not even telling her how that's going to conflict with her life. So that's a good lead into this next thing I want to read. This is from Stephanie, who is a doctor, and this is about being a doctor and a mom, essentially. She says, hi, Suzanne. I believe your position on the current culture is so relevant and helpful. I wanted to contribute to the happily married responders because she's happily married. That's great. A little bit about my background, though. I'm a 38-year-old mom of a 1.5-year-old, and I'm a physician. I've been blessed to work part-time, and since becoming a mom, have found a shift in my priorities. When declaring that I wanted to be a physician when I was young, she had a mom, I guess, like me. My mom responded, "Are you sure?" I definitely wasn't raised with feminist dogma explicitly taught at home. And my mom still laments that she returned to work when my youngest brother was very young, which is really interesting because my mother did the same thing, actually. Let's see, regarding her decision as the major factor that led him to having more difficulty later on, blah, blah, blah. Okay. At the same time, I certainly got the cultural message of I am woman, hear me roar. I have hardly any female physician friends who have decided to work part-time like me. My best friend from med school and residency is working on her 4th child, and both she and husband work full-time.
My God.
Recently, I asked her if she'd ever consider working part-time, and she replied matter-of-factly, I hadn't thought about it. And that was the end of the conversation. I say all of this. Let's see. Wait, hold on. Anyway, by the grace of God, I found my husband, and by age 35 was married and gave birth to our daughter. Several of my very accomplished and talented friends and colleagues have commented to me that motherhood is the best part of life. And another has confided in me that she looks back now and wonders why she didn't decide to work less when her 2 children were very young. I say all of this to make a point that the world of physician moms is a vast, complicated, and hardly talked about in a way that I have found helpful. While the focus seems to be on topics like the wage gap, or how to juggle the stress of being a physician mom, or blaming all of society for making us feel so stressed out, I am left wondering, am I such an oddball? I have had other colleagues look at me in bewilderment that I work half-time. Blah, 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 blah. I could give many more examples, but suffice it to say that the themes on your show ring true in the world of medicine like any other field. So that was interesting because I think that is absolutely a taboo. subject to the idea that you would tell a daughter, you might want to rethink that plan. And here's why. Because, the whole idea is that I am woman, hear me roar, I can do whatever the hell I want, as though there's nothing else to life but whatever you want, which if you're never going to get married and have kids, I suppose you could certainly do. But if you are being derelict in your duty to not tell her the reality and help her create a path that will work 10, 15 years down the road. So,
Right.
Okay, you want to be a physician? Maybe we can look at another avenue within that field that works better, for example, that you can move in and out of, that's a little more flexible, something like that.
Right. And something that I would say is that what I've experienced from awakening, I guess you could say, to this countercultural view is that it's very lonely. It's a very lonely road to go down. So I think that, I'm not a parent yet, and I don't pretend to know what it's like to raise children, but I would say that the discussion that needs to happen is that, going against the grain is difficult. And being an outsider means, like for me, it means personally, because I'm in the music industry and I also do my marketing stuff and whatever, but it's very hard. You're isolated. You're in this, especially until the rest of my generation and the generations that are coming before me wake up to the reality of life. That's the truth, is that it's a very lonely road. It's hard to meet friends that are like-minded. And you feel very isolated at times.
It is very lonely. That's what makes me so frustrated. And I'm so sad about it, because it shouldn't be that way. And yet I can't argue that you're right. It is that way. And your choices are almost to give in, right? So that you go along to get along. And then you're personally unhappy, but you're just doing things so that you have friends, I guess. Or you are secure and happy and content knowing that you're doing the right thing, even though you have fewer friends around you. And
it's hard.
Those aren't good choices, are they? But that's why the more, like you were saying earlier, the more, whether it's podcasts or whether it's books or whether it's whatever it is, the solution cannot be for people to just shut up and give in, right? Any more than like this cancel culture business where you just give into that. It makes me nuts.
It's hard. It's hard because people, the problem is with the cancel culture is that, if you're in a position like I am in the music world, if you speak out, if you're conservative, you are canceled. You are completely canceled. Like you lose your job. And when you're trying to pay bills, it's very hard, and my husband is Hispanic. And so for him, it's even double down on the thing, because then you're going against your race. And that's a whole nother conversation. But it's like, if you don't conform, you can't pay your bills. Like it's bad.
So this is why it's so good that you have, because basically you just have each other, right?
You
have each other in terms of being able to be your free, full self in your home.
Of course.
Yeah.
Right now all we do is bemoan the current climate.
Oh yeah, I know. Okay, so speaking of that, before we close out, I want you to tell everybody what you wanted to say about what you've learned as a result of COVID when it comes to money and eloping and all of that. Tell everybody your story.
So COVID was a huge wake-up call for me and my husband, Andre. So, we're musicians. We have our own business. We actually run 2 different businesses. So we're entrepreneurs. We don't have the normal 9-to-5 job. So when the COVID thing happened, we lost all of our jobs, pretty much. And at that time, we had actually previous to that come off a cruise ship. We're a band that worked on a cruise ship. So that was going to be our main source of income for a little while. And of course that completely tanked. So at the time we were planning our wedding, and in the beginning we wanted to have a wedding of 125, 150 people. And Andres and I were sitting here going, okay, well, who's going to pay for this? What are we going to do? And the COVID thing hit. And I have to tell you, COVID, although it's been a terrible situation for a lot of the world, has been the best thing that's ever happened to me and us. Because right when COVID hit, we started to realize that we were replaceable in our jobs. 1, 2, there were no jobs in what we did, and that we were going to have to be more self-sufficient. So by self-sufficient, I mean we needed to get out of debt. We both brought debt into our marriage, very foolish consumer debt, wanting to keep up with the next door neighbor, wanting to buy a nice car, wanting to have a nice this, that, and the other thing. And we started listening to Dave Ramsey, another Dave Ramsey plug, and we started to really attack our debt. That was the goal. Like, we were going to get out of debt. So part of that was we weren't going to have a big wedding. And for me, that was hard because I had envisioned growing up this princess affair. I'd put very little thought into the marriage aspect of it. But I knew I wanted, the dress and the flowers and the bridesmaids. I know. So when this whole thing happened, we sat down and we looked at each other and we said, what do we really want our life to look like? Do we want to spend, $100,000 on a wedding? Or do we want to put that towards our future and work towards getting out of this debt? So we essentially eloped with a small group of friends, really family, and actually, you got to come, which was the icing on the cake for me, because it's because of Suzanne that I got married, honestly. That's the truth. It's because of you that I even did that. Because my whole life was a fast track towards career and being, the best in my field and being wealthy and being revered. And, I've said before, I read an article of Suzanne's. The whole thing hit me like a ton of bricks. It was very depressing. But it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me because we really got serious. We paid off a bunch of debt, even without having steady jobs through the COVID thing. We eloped with a group of under 10. And like I said, that was hard because a lot of my friends had these huge weddings. And I felt like because I wasn't doing that, I was cheapening out. I was less than. And that's not the case. I have a huge case for a small wedding, actually.
Yeah, you have a bigger bank account.
Not only that, it's just you focus on what's important. Mm-hmm. And what's important is what you're into, the next phase of your life that you're entering into. Because when the cake's done and the DJ's paid and the flowers are dead, you have to live with your choice. And you also have to know that that's what it's about. It's not about the bachelorette party and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a wedding. It's much more than that. And it was so much deeper for me getting to spend time with the people in my life that I really care about and that I love deeply. So
there's the skinny on how to get married. The easier, more meaningful, cheaper way, which I'm all for.
And it was beautiful. And it was it was beautiful. And not only was it beautiful, but it was was no stress. I see all these brides and they're pulling their hair out.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is not what it's about. You're getting married. It's about getting married. So.
Okay. Now we just have to go and change every other millennial who was on the same page that you were.
I'm on a crusade. I'm on a crusade now for this. So.
Awesome. Okay, Kelsey. So thank you for joining me today and helping me hash out and rant about millennials. I'm sorry, millennials. The millennials that are hearing me, I think they'll understand, certainly if they're followers of mine. But if you're not, let me throw in a few awesome things about millennials. I think it's really cool that they view the world. I think, this has to do with technology, of course, but that they're entrepreneurial. Their heads are very entrepreneurial by nature. Like I am, but it's less. There are plenty of people in my generation too, but it's really in the millennial mind. It's like, how can I do my own thing and create my own thing? And of course, technology has allowed that to flourish. So that's really cool. I'm sure there are other things, but I'm just focusing.
Oh my God! Well, thank you. Thanks for that.
No, there are other things. Of course, there are other things. I'm just trying to think about something about their specific generation.
No, that's what I would say. They're really great with technology. That's why you. That's why you have me.
I know. So people are sitting here listening, going like, "Why did you hire this musician to be your assistant, Suzanne? What's up with that?" it's because she is entrepreneurial. She's got a side business. She's got several businesses. So the musician is just one thing, but she has a social media marketing, not marketing really, but social media. I don't know. What do you call it?
Well, it's a virtual personal assistant and social media and digital marketing company. So
okay, there you go. So basically every single time I'm like, what the hell? I don't know what to do. I call her and she's right there to fix it for me. And you need a millennial for that. I mean, there's no way I can do this without her. So yeah, that's an obvious plus. There's, as I say, there's other things about millennials. I'm sure I'm just focused on this thing, which, by the way, I have to repeat, I don't blame millennials. I blame their parents. I blame boomers. I think boomers really screwed up parenting in a big way. And that's like a whole nother episode.
I think we can hope for a resurgence of different kinds of values, because the fallout from my generation, I think, might spur a different thought process.
My daughter seems to think that that's already happening, and
I think so. I do.
Yeah, and if that didn't, and if it wasn't going to happen organically, COVID might bring it on.
It's going to make people very self-sufficient, because you I remember in your last podcast, Bradford said, you can't depend on the state, and you can't depend on the government, and your job is, you can go in and out of so many different jobs. It is what it is. I mean, that's it.
Okay, Kelsey. Thank you. And that ends this hour of the Suzanne Venker Show. Don't forget to tune in next week when we talk with Dr. James Dobson about how to raise boys in a culture that demonizes men. And don't forget, you can continue the conversation on Facebook. Just type in the Suzanne Venker Show in the Facebook search bar and you'll find it. Also, please recommend this podcast to one friend you think would enjoy it. And don't forget to leave us a review on whatever platform you're now using. Finally, if you have a question or comment for me, you can email me at Suzanne@thesuzannevenkershow.com. Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a great week.